So I just wanted to first thank everybody that participated today. It was extremely enriching and important to be able to hear all of your insights here today. And so again, maybe starting from the top, what we did today is we were looking to have a better sense of the different sort of territorial indicators that were help us understand rural and urban settlement patterns in Sweden. Nordregio provided an abundant source of information that I look forward to reading in more depth again once this is over on the ESPON website. And one of the things I think that's quite interesting in this regard that ESPON mentioned is, and also this is something that Josefina Sussner also mentioned, is just the degree to which rural depopulation is not only a current problem for many Swedish authorities, but it's going to be an even greater problem. And obviously, this is an issue that affects rural communities in very different ways. In some cases, it's not a process that is uniform by any stretch, and that we need to really understand what is happening in each of these contexts. And that is going to help us better understand the particular planning responses that are going to be made at different levels of the state and territorial administrations. Another thing that we discussed here that was also raised by Sverker is questioning who is gaining and losing from these trends, what types of provisioning of local services and infrastructure are influencing these dynamics, and what types of supports are needed to improve rural dynamics in terms of planning, infrastructure, and services. And so how can we think about the integration of urban and rural services and centers for these planning processes more broadly? In the second session, with Josefina Sussner and Erika Sandow, we looked at two different dynamics related to the governance and planning of both rural environments. One is pertaining to rural depopulation and the effects that this is having locally. And then we were also looking at counter-urbanization trends, that is to say, from larger municipalities to not necessarily rural environments per se, but smaller towns, medium and smaller towns as well. And that I think this really reinforces a lot of provides some sort of qualitative content to much of the work that Nordregio presented in the first session, kind of giving a sense for how exactly it is that these rural to urban dynamics don't just happen in one sort of linear direction. So say from rural environments to sort of large cities such as Malmö or Gothenburg, but also happen in the opposite direction as well. And that creates sort of new issues to be thinking about in terms of planning and territorial development. And I think one of the things that is perhaps quite interesting as well that Sverker raised is that just because there are push dynamics from these rural environments into the sort of rural context doesn't necessarily mean that rural contexts necessarily have the attributes or services that people from these urban environments are necessarily looking for. And so what we have is a sort of a circle that's not completed here, where we have people that might be leaving rural environments to go to urban environments, but then might want to return to less urbanized contexts, but not necessarily the same ones that they left. And so that makes for planning these trajectories, both in terms of the trajectories of the households themselves, but also the trajectories of planning for the future, increasingly difficult, I think, or all the more difficult, let's put it that way. And then finally, we had a great roundtable session with many of our territorial authorities from across central and southern Sweden, focused on Västra Götaland near Norway, Kronoberg, which is in the southeast of Sweden, Skåne, which is in the southwest near Copenhagen. And then we also had a representative from the National Board of Housing, Building and Planning, and a representative from the Interreg program. And here we were trying to get a better sense of what exactly do these dynamics look like on the ground in the context of COVID, and what sort of responses are being developed to better address these issues. And again, I think some of the issues that we see here, we see a lot of complements actually between the work that Josefina Sussner raised in terms of the question of how do we think about rural environments and the question of growth as a priority versus alternatives to growth as a sort of set of planning prescriptions. It appears that COVID itself hasn't necessarily been significantly impacted settlement patterns within Sweden, but on the other hand, there is enough of a change, particularly from what we've seen from Nordregio's reporting, that something has been happening, and that needs to be looked into further, and hopefully to develop better mechanisms to map and measure these territorial indicators for better policymaking in the future. And I think as a final question, which I think is great in terms of this ESPON outreach program, is the question of Nordic cooperation and European cooperation more broadly. And so how might these examples from the Swedish, but also wider Nordic region, help us better understand what is happening in other parts of Europe in terms of housing, in terms of the responses to the COVID pandemic, as well as in responses to multi-level governance techniques that can be better used to address and respond to these dynamics. And I think as a final point in that form of cooperation, that final point about Nordic cooperation, European cooperation more broadly is in the context of ESPON as well, is the importance of considering the need to develop indicators that can help us share and compare what is happening in these different territories of the European Union to each other. So not just within the Nordic context, but also much further beyond the Nordic context. And so on that note, what I'd like to do is leave the concluding remarks to Sverker, who has graciously offered to do that for us today. So thank you.
Thank you, William. I will be quite brief, but first of all, I want to thank you all for very interesting both presentations and intervention during this afternoon. And also thank you, William, for excellent moderating this event. If I just should pick up one maybe obvious conclusion from this afternoon, I would say that what we have discussed here today is kind of a moving target. And this implies, of course, that we need further analysis, further research on what is happening. Someone said that it might be too early to speak about post-COVID trends, and that's absolutely true. We are in the middle of this pandemic, and we don't know what will happen in the future, but we certainly need to know more about what effects, territorial effects, this will imply. And if I just should pick one issue that I will be very interested in to follow in this further research and analysis is what is happening with this widening urban functional areas around the cities that will, so to say, incorporate rural areas. That will be much bigger maybe than today. What types of planning, spatial planning interventions do we need for having a good development in such areas? So that was my final conclusions from today, and thank you everyone for an excellent afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.